Welcome to the 78th episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A. Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're excited to be back recapping spring practice. Let's get started.
All right, well, we were delayed in recording just because we had some family in town. But now, with all the distractions out of the way, and I say that in a very, very appreciative way, let's start off talking this whole spring recap with Coach Jeff Traylor.
Absolutely.
Here's what I got to say about Coach Traylor. It was, I think, refreshing at the very beginning of spring to see him discuss the fact that he wasn't going to coach scared anymore, that he was going to really hold on to his culture, the triangle of toughness. And I applaud him because obviously we completely criticized him so much about it last season.
Yeah.
Because he was so whiny about it. He wasn't going back to what he had established.
Right.
And it did feel like he was just kind of walking on eggshells. And he's alluded to that as well. Mm-hmm. But to me, I think as Coach Traylor looks over his UTSA program, he really needs to focus on one quote that I really love from Sir Richard Branson. And that is, train people well enough so they can leave, treat them well enough so they don't want to. That, to me, epitomizes Jeff Traylor. Mm-hmm. He builds up these players, as he says, he brings them in, coaches them hard, loves them, and he gives them an opportunity to go somewhere else. And a handful of players have.
Yeah, and again, they haven't left for something similar. They've left for, in his words, life-changing money.
Right. Which is what you want, which is the crux of this quote, right? Like, this is what you are essentially building up your players to be. So I hope that, and I believe that that's what he has done, but Coach Traylor, I think, looked inside himself and realized as much as fans love him, his players adore him, and that's why they're still here.
Yeah.
That's why they show up to practice. That's why they go and they play hard for him. That's why they sacrifice their bodies at times just to make sure to show him how much he means to them. So I thought it was a great way to start the spring, and I feel like we're going to come back to this a little bit, but I feel like it's such a great way to get us kicked off and go into some of the roster changes that we've had.
Yeah, and without really getting into a lot of changes in terms of the roster and the coaching changes this season, just a couple of things to kind of highlight. We do have several super seniors back again this season. Some of the notable ones, Oscar Cardenas, we talked before about the fact that he had announced that he's coming back. We'll get into him a little bit more when we talk about the tight ends. Elliot Davidson, Ken Robinson, these two are going to be your starters at safety, and we're going to talk more about a couple of changes because it's been significant that we've talked about Rashad Wisdom for so many seasons that now we're looking at two completely different people. Jamal Ligon, Joe Evans, and Donnie Taylor.
Key guys that are going to be big on this defensive squad. There really wasn't much movement in the transfer portal. So far we've had Cam Scott, who just really didn't pan out, and Choo Choo Doe, a wide receiver. To lose two guys at this point that really weren't major contributors, I think is a positive sign. Wouldn't you agree?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, again, I don't think that we're going to see any big names jump in the portal this season. Like at the spring game last year, there was kind of all of this noise about Zakari. I don't think you're going to see that. And I think it all goes back to kind of the attitude change that Traylor had this season.
Yeah, I agree. Let's talk some coaching changes then.
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, there's not anything really significant that's happened this season, but the one position that I'm ecstatic about is the fact that we have a special teams coordinator.
Yes.
Zach Brown, previously the director of player personnel, is now our special teams coordinator. You're not going to hear me harp on the fact that we don't have a special teams coordinator this season, so that should make a lot of people happy. Hunter Ritteman, another name that's been with the program for a while. He is now the tight ends coach. And then I think the other thing that's significant for the team is, obviously Traylor's been able to utilize some of that money that was committed to him by Harvey Najum And, he's now added this new position, director of scouting. He brought on Parker Cundiff, who was formerly at Washington State and was their lead scout. I would be remiss if I didn't mention the fact that we now have a female joining the football staff, which, I also think is really great. Jenna Learn is joined as the director of recruiting. She was formerly from Michigan State as their director of on-campus recruiting. She's a young, kind of up-and-coming name, and I think having her join the team and really having Traylor be able to build out some of these recruiting and scouting positions is going to be important as we move forward in the AAC.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think let's get into some of the signees. We're not going to go too much into it. We're just going to talk a little bit about maybe some guys that we're going to be talking about a little bit later when we start talking about the scrimmage and the spring game. December signees, you had several high school players, but I think here's the kicker to them. We're not going to be depending on any of these players. If they make, some sort of contribution this year, it's going to be terrific. Mm-hmm. But unlike years past, I just don't see that there's going to be some player that's going to just pop so much that you're like, we have to have him on the field.
Right.
And that's a really good sign for the program. Again, a program that's continuing to mature. You don't have to worry about walk-ons anymore playing in the 2 deep. You don't have to worry about getting freshmen to have to play immediately. So, depth.
Yeah.
It's going to be huge for the football season because we all know there's always going to be some injuries that we've not expected whatsoever. And I don't think this next coming season is going to be any different. There's going to be something that happens, and we're going to just be looking at it going, gosh, I feel bad for that player. But we now have this other player that's just as talented that's coming in. At least that's the way I see it across the board for the UTSA football program.
Yeah, one name, though, that I wanted to call out from the high school group, just because for those of us who have followed the program since the very beginning, Briley Brown, high school offensive lineman who is joining the team next year out of O'Connor High School. His last name may sound familiar to you because his older brother, Brady Brown, was the center back on that 2011 team. So it's kind of
nice.
Cool that there's this connection back to the original group from UTSA. So
it's cool that we're starting to see it too, right? Like
yeah.
That's even better where we're starting to get these players that had siblings, and you kind of start seeing that lineage maybe that we can kind of look back on and say, wow, that was so cool that
probably not many have that big of an age gap, where they can have a younger brother joining now, but still.
Yeah. All right, let's talk about some of the transfers that we had. Big name here is going to be J.J. Sparkman, a wide receiver from Texas Tech, 6'4", 225. We'll talk about him a little bit later once we go over the scrimmage and the spring game. Another big name was C.J. James, 6'4", 295 from New Mexico. He is listed as offensive lineman. We know he's going to be a center. Damian Wimberly, defensive lineman, 6'4", 260 from SMU. And Cale Hogan, punter from Australia. Again, like we've talked about before, no stranger to Australian punters. So kind of fun to see that kind of continue now with Cale Hogan. A few other transfers that came in during February were Brevin Randall, a linebacker from La Tech.
Yeah, I think a lot of people probably know that name. Not so much because we think he's going to be a big contributor. He may be, but I think people will recognize the name because we've played La Tech so many times. And there was an incident where he stepped on a player's neck from UTEP. So lots of people probably heard about that incident, saw the video because it went viral. Hopefully that doesn't really represent a bad side of Brevin. Hopefully it was just a mistake, but certainly an aggressive player, I think.
Yeah. I don't think that Traylor or Jess Lepp are going to be happy if that happens again. So, another name here, you talk about an incident with UTEP. We've got Denver Harris, big name, started at LSU, or started at A&M, went to LSU last season. Incredibly talented player. I think a lot of people have been kind of trying to figure out, we've got this big name player that came over here, but he's on his third school. Mm-hmm. As Coach Traylor has said, he's given him another shot.
Yeah. And, there was a connection, obviously, to Joe Price, who was this high school coach. I think the thing that we can always feel confident in, though, is that Traylor and his staff have always done a really good job of trying to vet these players. So I have more faith in Coach Traylor's judgment than perhaps we've seen at some other programs.
Absolutely. But while Denver Harris is the big name, a guy that's kind of surprised has been Zach Morris. It's kind of weird. I just think of Saved by the Bell right away, but...
that dates us right there, but
right,
yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Zach Morris, cornerback, 6'1", 190, out of New Mexico. He looks like he's been running with the ones. So that's, I think, huge. If Denver Harris is as talented a player as we think he is, and he's running with the twos, gotta tell you, there's so much talent at the ones. Mm-hmm. But I also don't think that Denver Harris is going to stay very long. As long as everything works out with him, stay very long with the twos, he's probably going to challenge for the ones. This is going to make our team much better. Two more names here that were transfers: Kamar, Missouri offensive lineman at Rutgers, and Jalen Garth, another offensive lineman from Houston. Jalen Garth seemed to make a name for himself on the offensive line. This looked like he was running with the ones, at least the first unit that we saw at the scrimmage. So we'll see how he does. Maybe he stays, maybe he doesn't. But again, just talent. And what I loved about what Traylor did was that, as he pointed out during the signing days, he wasn't looking for he was looking for talent, but he was being very judicious about where he wanted to plug this talent in, where he needed. It was needs.
Where he needed the depth, yeah.
And that was big. Normally you're trying to look for, I think, if you were in a different position, he was probably looking for guys that can make impacts immediately. He's not. He's looking for depth pieces, guys that are talented and could possibly challenge, but there again, you get that competition going, and that's what drives these spring practices.
Yeah, one more thing to say before you move on. Tied back to your initial comment about Traylor and why people come here and why people stay. J.J. Sparkman was someone that Coach Traylor was recruiting all the way back when he was at Arkansas, and built that relationship with J.J. Sparkman, and he said that was one of the reasons why when he hit the transfer portal, he wanted to come and connect with Coach Traylor, because they had this relationship. And, not that he would reach out to him occasionally and just say, hey, how are you doing? Hope everything's okay. And, that was something that was really important to J.J. Sparkman, and one of the reasons why he was attracted to this program.
And I'm glad you brought that up, because I read an article in The Athletic, and there's a couple of articles about who recruits Dallas and Houston the best from all the Texas schools. And it kept getting brought up that UTSA over and over recruits really well. Obviously, Texas high school coach Jeff Traylor is going to have great relationships. He's going to have assistants that are going to have great relationships. But they brought up the point that you just brought up. They establish relationships with some of these players that they know are going to go to these big programs. And if they end up bombing out or something else happens and they look for a parachute landing somewhere, UTSA is always on the horizon because of what they establish with them. So let's get to some of the gaps, because we might see more, right? As you set up here with this relationship that you were talking about. Specifically, we're looking for secondary depth. We do have talent, and they brought up the cornerbacks, but we could use a couple more corners, could use a couple more safeties. You could make a case that maybe you want some guys to be able to challenge for the starting position, but I think it's it's depth again. Once again, we just need some bodies in here that can come in and play, and if need to, will make an impact if they're called upon. We'll get to this a little bit more, but the veteran backup quarterback, in my opinion, I think you just need someone that can challenge for the backup spot. Someone that's had some snaps, but even then, it's not going to be somebody that I think you need to start right away.
Right.
Like, you don't need him as a day one starter. So it's not a doomsday scenario, I guess, is where I'm going with this.
Right. It's more about depth because, unfortunately we have had a history of having injuries at the quarterback position. And so, we'll talk about the battle between Owen and Eddie, but there is a drop when you get behind Owen and Eddie.
Absolutely. All right, so we're going to talk about our scrimmage and spring game thoughts and how we the story we created, I think, for what we saw. So let me set up the scrimmage and the scrimmage that we went to. It was the first weekend in April. It was a muggy day. if you've ever been to the race facility to see the football fields, the field closest to the race facility on the left-hand side is artificial turf. The one on the right-hand side is a grass field. Just the natural way to play football, right? So, they actually played on the natural side, the grass side, a little surprising. All the fans were essentially in the middle, so we were facing the field on the right-hand side, and the defense was on the opposite side. It was muggy, but it was also starting to drizzle, and it wasn't a hard drizzle. It was just one of that pesky drizzles that you're like, all right, this might affect some of the ball handling. And I wouldn't say it really did anything for the ball handlers, because again, controlled scrimmage, but it certainly gave you an idea of what that relationship between the center and quarterback is going to be like, and which we'll get to in a little while. It was weird, I thought, not to have Frank out there for the first time, but he was still on the sidelines.
Yeah, kind of like he was last year.
Yeah, but, another but, there is no way he's going to take the field.
Right.
Unlike last season where he was injured and he wasn't, we knew he would play in the fall, but this time he's not going to be there. So I thought, looking at the scrimmage and looking at the spring game, I thought the defense won.
Yeah. I mean, they definitely, it's a little hard if you look at the score from the spring game to say that, just because the way that they score that game and the fact that they stop plays really early sometimes, I think makes it a little bit deceptive. But it definitely seemed like there was a lot more consistency on the defensive side. And I think part of that just goes back to the fact that you're really just plugging depth for the most part on the defensive side of the ball.
Right.
Where you're really trying to work through on the offensive side of the ball, who's the quarterback, who's going to be, the running backs were injured, so you didn't have, the same guys. We're trying to figure out the wide receivers, so I think there's just more inconsistency on the offensive side as well.
And in both games we had so much substitution and so many guys wearing different jerseys.
Yeah.
There was points where I was like, where I looked at you and I said, that's not Mekhi Hart out there, but that's his number.
Yeah, particularly at this the scrimmage, we were standing by Mekhi Hart, so I knew that the guy wearing his number was not him. And it took a while, and I finally asked someone, they're like, oh, that's Venley. Like, why Venley was wearing Mekhi Hart's number in the scrimmage, I'm not sure. He had the right number on in the spring game, but it was kind of interesting. There were a couple of those situations.
Yeah.
Not to mention the fact that, no one has the single digit number. So then you're trying to remember, like, what was their old number.
Right.
So that was just kind of confusing in a lot of cases. So it's like you're writing down a number, like, I don't really think that's the right person. Like, the person who was playing center opposite of Luke Lopez was wearing a number for, like, a walk-on. It was like, I know that's not the right person. So it took a while for us to kind of dissect like who's doing what. It was better at the spring game, but still, that's one of those pieces that was just always gets a little bit confusing with the single digits alone. And then, when they're, I don't know if like somebody didn't wash their uniform or what the deal was, but it was just very confusing.
Well, Atos being the wonderful partner that she is, brought AirPods for the spring game, so I was able to tap into and listen to the radio broadcast, so I could see what it was actually a little bit behind, but I could still able to kind of lean over and tell her, oh, that was this person per Andy Everett.
Yeah, but they were still confused too.
There was a lot of scrambling of papers trying to figure it out, but they had all sorts of rosters up there, so they I think they were able to do a much better job of than us, I should say, of identifying these players. But I wouldn't say it was like defensive feel, but because of all these things that the offense is going through, and especially I think with the new signal caller, it's just trying to find what that signal caller can do. Without having Frank there for the first time. You saw it last spring game too. There was some struggles from the offensive side of the ball. So I think this defense is going to be good. And I want to start first though with special teams, because I feel like we talked about Cale Hogan as one of the transfers that came in. What I saw from him at the scrimmage, even when he was warming up, had a good leg. I will say, though, while while he has a good leg, he doesn't really have a lot of hang time on his punts. And so that concerns me a little bit just because of the punt coverage. You know, it's, you know, line drive punts or, you know, longer punts, but just low lying ones aren't going to benefit the coverage too much. So, but aside from that, there's certainly an area for growth. But again, I have to remind everybody that you've lost essentially a 4 or 5 year starter in Lucas Dean, and we were so used to the punts that he had, much like the quarterback that we'll talk about later, like, you're going to have to reset expectations.
Yeah, and it was kind of interesting because one of the players' fathers was standing next to us and was hypercritical of Kale's punting. I won't mention who that person's father was, but I thought, okay, last year when Lucas was hurt and we were at a scrimmage and we were watching 2 different guys punt, it was bad. They really, really had a hard time, and I felt very insecure about our punting if Lucas was not going to be out on the field. Right. But watching Kale, I mean, certainly he's going to have to continue to develop, but you didn't have this nervous feeling like, oh my gosh, he's going to shank this punt, 10 yards off to the side or something just ridiculous. I think certainly you got to go back and kind of think about, maybe what was Lucas like his first season, or what was Yanni like his first season, and kind of go back, because we've had this history of talented punters. And
going deep in that one.
I know. Yanni. I mean, we've talked so much about Lucas Dean. We forget how excited we all were about Yanni Roustis.
That's right. I think overall, though, you're right. I mean, I think it's just resetting the expectations and knowing, hopefully it gets a little bit better. It's not going to be prime Lucas Dean.
No, definitely not. But, I don't think there was anything that I saw that made me feel like we needed to be hypercritical of him.
Same thing with the place kicking. I don't think that there was much to look critically at. I mean, sure, I think there's some missed field goals, but I also would argue that everything just wasn't set up, I think, the way that they normally do it.
And I'd rather see them miss right now than in a game, in the fall or in the game situation.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, I think that was going to be the other part that I wanted to bring up. So overall, special teams was fine. I think, there's certainly a lot of talent in terms of returners, but you didn't get that traditional punt and, return as well. So we'll see how things go. We'll see if we can tap into some fall practices to get a better idea of how the special team has grown. I will say, though, the champs, as I have talked about, the defense, looking really good. The defensive line, to me, in both the scrimmage and during the spring game, was just twitchy. They did have some false starts, offsides in both games. But I think when you're so dominant and beating the offensive line essentially up so much, you're just licking your chops, and I think it'll be cleaned up. I don't think it's going to be a major concern. Obviously, we'll find out in the game once the games go live if that is a big concern. But at this point, it gives the defense something to continue to work on. I will say Damian Wimberly was impressive to me. Possibly because he was going up against DeAndre Marshall, who was playing right tackle.
Yeah, and he was just having a hard time.
He was. DeAndre got yelled at by Kirk Traylor, our offensive line coach. Only one offensive line coach, by the way.
Yeah.
He got yelled at really bad at the scrimmage because he had a false start. And Kurt lost it and said something to the effect of, "We're doing this again." So obviously it's been an issue. But even at the spring game, David Wimberly was getting by DeAndre. So DeAndre obviously has a little work to do. But on the good side, I think, for him is that he's not going to probably be facing a Damian Wimberly or another guy as talented. So
at least not in the beginning of the season.
No. And it looks like, I think the defensive line overall just looked... There was push, I guess is the best way to put it. There was a lot of push on the offensive line. And the offensive line kind of struggled at times to keep the protection up. There was certainly plenty of times, both at both games, that our quarterbacks were under quick pressure. So, something to watch out there. I think as the offensive line begins to gel and we start kind of solidifying that, we'll see how that kind of progresses. Linebackers and secondary looked good to me. The linebackers looked fast, getting to to each side of the field. There wasn't a lot of, I would say, big plays in the scrimmage, or I would say even at the spring game. I mean, we had a big run from Justin Rodriguez, but to me, there with the touch rules that essentially Coach Traylor plays with, it's frustrating for a defense because I'm sure that they're getting to their guys, but
we had an interception in the scrimmage, but
had a couple of interceptions.
Yeah. Elliot Davidson almost made one at the spring game, but just I'm sure he would love to have that back. He said as much in his post-game interview.
Yeah, absolutely. But I think the biggest thing to know about the secondary is that a couple of years ago, back in 2021, the first conference title season, we had Tariq Woolen, Corey Mayfield. We had some good secondary players. Wide receivers, tight ends were running wide open on our secondary. The exchange, the handoff of coverage was not there. Now it is all cleaned up, and you've had Nick Graham and Jess Lepp there the entire time. So kudos to both of them to have cleaned that up and to really, it's been tight coverage. There had to be some really, really good passes from our quarterbacks to get some completions. I mean, there just not a lot of guys running open one-on-one. So, obviously kudos to them and kudos to coaching up all these players. Lots of good signs from the defense. I think that this defense is going to be one of the better, if not, I don't want to say best, but probably one of the better defenses in UTSA football history. There's just loads of talent, and they're still trying to find, as I said, in the secondary, trying to find some more depth pieces. But you just look around, and there's just so many weapons that Jess Lepp has to play with that I'm hoping he gets a little more exotic in some of his coverages and his blitzes, because if I'm an opponent, having Danye coming at me from one end, having Damian Wimberly or any other defensive lineman coming at me, and some of these other linebackers that we have, I mean, it's going to be a talented defense, and I'm really excited from what I saw from the scrimmage and from the spring game. All right, let's go to the offense. We'll start with the offensive line first. We kind of already talked about it a little bit, but I think the one I want to focus here on the offensive line, I thought there was good performances overall, and I know it broke down, but I think there's still a lot of trying to figure out, who's going to be on what.
Yeah, there was a lot of rotation, even at the ones.
Yeah. So I think once they gel a little bit more, it won't be as, I think, overwhelming of a defensive line win. But we did have a little bit of concerns with the center because Luke Lopez and CJ James are battling out for the number one position. Luke Lopez was obviously the starter last year. CJ James was kind of brought in to challenge him, and there was some concerns with the snaps.
Yeah, I mean, we saw some bad snaps from both of them, frankly.
Right.
It wasn't, you couldn't just say, oh, it was a bad snap, that wasn't this person or it was that person. So there's still that kind of consistency issue, and I think, I know you're going to talk about the quarterback later. The thing that concerns me is that relationship between the center and the quarterback, and the fact that right now we don't know who the center is or who the starting quarterback is. So, I know that Coach Traylor loves to kind of play this game where he doesn't like to tell anybody who's really the number one on his depth chart until the last second. But I really do hope that in the fall, fairly early into that fall practice, he establishes those two starting positions, because they need to have that kind of chemistry that we've seen between, Frank and Maka in previous years. I think that's going to be really important, and I hope that, even if the public doesn't know, the team knows. Right.
Good points. Again, I think, there's, with so much movement around, it's tough to really dissect, but overall, the ones looked pretty good. Obviously, once they get the time together, I think they're going to be fine.
Yeah, and Finley, is playing with the club, but he still seemed to be playing well, and it looked like they had moved him back to the guard position, which I think is a good sign.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's talk a little bit about the skill positions. Let's start with the tight ends. Oscar Cardenas looking pretty thin. Really slimmed down to get into that tight end shape.
Yeah, he talked a lot about how NFL teams were telling him, really they thought maybe he should go towards the offensive line position, or he really needed to lose weight to kind of stay and be someone they would look at as a tight end. And he really wants to play tight end. He didn't want to go that route that Leroy Watson has gone. So he really does look much thinner. It'll be interesting to see kind of how that really translates in terms of his speed.
Yeah.
But you can tell he's definitely been working hard at that.
Absolutely, he has. The other tight ends, I thought, look fleet of foot. I mean, there's just, again, there's some weapons here. There's, Traylor loves himself a tight end, and he's been trying to find ways of getting these guys on the field, and I think everybody's making a very good case to be either on the opposite side of Oscar or even, give Oscar plenty of breathers throughout the season.
We saw some really good plays from Houston Thomas.
Yeah.
Dan Dishman. So, I think we've got depth there, and if we can stay healthy, it's going to be a position that I think we'll all feel pretty confident about.
Another position group, running backs, that we didn't see a lot of our starters. Rocco Griffin.
He played a little bit, but not a lot.
Yeah. Even in both, I think it was in both games that he did show up in the scrimmage as well. Kevorian Barnes was held out. I think it's well known now that he's had some issues with his shoulder, so that kept him out. And hopefully, I mean, you're not concerned at this point. If this thing lingers all the way into fall and he's missing a ton of fall camp, then I think there's some concern as to his health moving forward. But you still got a nice group of running backs to fall back on.
Yeah, Robert Henry, they said he could have played, but it was more precautionary. He was not, dressed at the scrimmage either.
Yeah, but the one that was dressed was Brandon High. Impressed with him. Obviously last year when we talked about him with the scrimmage, he busted a long run. He looked fast. This year he looks faster. At the spring game, he had some really nice runs. I'll say this. Let's say that the three running backs are healthy going into the season. If Brandon High can carve out just a handful of carries, how scary is it for an opposing defense to have those three running backs, Barnes, Henry, and Griffin, and then all of a sudden go to this fast youngster that they bring in to kind of change speeds on them? Like, a tired defense is not going to want to be seeing Brandon High coming at them.
I'd also love to see him play on special teams. How many times have we talked about, we haven't had the ability really to put a running back, on special teams since BJ Daniels. Yeah,
and it's a nice to have, I guess is the best way to put it, right? Yeah. Like it's going to be a nice to have. Let's go to the wide receivers. The big talk of camp, I think, has been J.J. Sparkman.
Yep.
Made some huge plays during the scrimmage. Made some big plays at the spring game.
Yeah.
He's just... You talked about his relationship with Traylor, and I think that's what's been important here. Who knows how, he performs going into fall camp. But I think heading out of this camp, he's definitely going to be on the outside there for whoever's starting at quarterback.
Yeah, he definitely looks like somebody who can fill that void until, JT hopefully can come back and play. The other thing that was interesting when you talk about JJ Sparkman is that Elliot Davidson also mentioned he had played against JJ in high school, like in some scrimmages and stuff. So, there was kind of this theme throughout, and we'll talk more about it when we get to the quarterbacks, but there's kind of been this theme too of a lot of these kids have played each other in high school, and that's also, I think, helping with the team chemistry, and they know the other person, they have kind of a connection with them, whether they played on the same high school team or they played opposite of each other. So
well, going back to what we started with, Coach Traylor, there's that relationship there, but if one of those guys asks a current player, is he full of BS or not?
Yeah.
And they're like, no. And we've heard it a bunch of times. No, this place is different. it's why we're getting a lot of these talented guys giving UTSA a look. Willie McCoy, good to see him healthy out there.
Yeah, definitely.
Made some catches. There was a lot of, even some local kids made a few big catches.
Yeah, I mean, we saw a lot out of Jaron Randall, which was good. You've seen him on the roster. He's from San Antonio, hasn't gotten a ton of playing time. Started to ramp up a little bit last season at the end, wearing a new number. So he's number 10 as of right now. So that also was, one of those things that kind of threw us off. And then Justice Hurt, who I believe is from your alma mater, Taft.
Yeah, absolutely. He looked pretty dominant there near the very end of the scrimmage, catching some big time passes. Look, once again, you're just finding talent, and these wide receiver group, like I get we're saying that we're not really sure what it's going to look like. There's inconsistency. There was guys that were held out too.
We're not going to have a Josh Cephas level person probably on the field with very few drops like we've seen from Josh Cephas. So again, there's going to be some challenges. Obviously we know Devin McCune is very talented. We know David Amador is very talented. We got to see them last year, which is good, but still you're not going to have that go to Josh Cephas, Sakari Franklin, JT Clark kind of guy out there most likely. But JJ Sparkman, he could be the guy. Yeah,
absolutely. All right, let's talk quarterbacks, because I know that's been the whole thing, right? Like, what are the
It is the
thoughts?
elephant in the room.
Yeah. All right. Look, in terms of the scrimmage, I thought Owen looked better at just distributing. He's always been a very good distributor. He was getting pressured, like I said before, because his defensive line was really starting to eat up the offensive line at times. But he was spreading the ball around the field. When Eddie came in, he wasn't distributing quickly. He was getting the ball out, but it was essentially hash marks to the sideline. It was none of the passes that I saw were within the hash marks in the middle of the field, which was a concern for me because you got to be able to spread it around. And there were some guys that I thought had some space for him to be able to throw it, but he really seemed to be kind of looking downfield trying to get a big play. And I thought in the scrimmage it cost him a couple times, but he also benefited from it a couple times because of the fact that he held on a little bit longer just to bomb it downfield. It's very hot and cold for me, and it's a concern. Mm-hmm. But I thought in the spring game, when it came to the two of them, I thought Owen just did not have a very good game in the spring game, as opposed to Eddie, who looked much more comfortable and seemed to be, dare I say, he looked more like the number one quarterback. Yeah. I think the way he played.
But again, lots of long, deep passes. And that's my concern with Eddie is he's very comfortable with the deep pass. There's been people who've said, he holds onto the ball too long, partially because he's looking for that deep pass.
Yeah.
And my concern is if that is what he puts his bread and butter in, then it's going to be very easy for a defense to take that away from him.
Yeah, absolutely.
So that kind of gives the edge, in my mind, to Owen because, again, he is spreading it around more. He will take a shorter pass. He'll go through his reads. And that may be the thing that gives him the edge over Eddie, even though I think people are going to look at it from going to the spring game and seeing Eddie make these long, deep passes. That's what we saw in the Army game as well. But you can't be one-dimensional as a quarterback,
right?
At this level. And it just felt like maybe that was the case. And then as we listened to these wide receiver interviews all throughout spring practice, what they said about Eddie consistently was he's a gunslinger. Owen will pick apart a defense and scramble. So that tells me that Eddie really is very comfortable with that deep pass and slinging it, but that may be too one-dimensional for what Traylor's trying to do with this offense this year.
Yeah, and it obviously, I think it makes for shorter drives, which hinder your defense, right? Your defense all of a sudden is going to spend more time on the field.
Yeah, you're basically
like the Army
air raid,
game, right? Because of the fact that it'll be one touchdown, one quick touchdown, and then no time has really gone off the clock to be able to give your defense a rest. So, yeah, totally the difference there. Let's talk about Brandon Tennyson. I thought he was the most consistent of quarterbacks. Like, there really wasn't a huge gain or drop off in both games. Like the scrimmage, he was pretty good. At the spring game, he was pretty good. Like, I'm not saying outstanding. I'm just saying pretty good.
And I was going to say, and let's clarify, you're talking about pretty good as QB3, not pretty good like you would put him in the QB1. No. Don't take that out of context. We're not looking at him as a starter.
No, but I will say that even though he's a shorter quarterback, I would be much more comfortable with him at number 3 because I felt like Jackson Gilkey, even though he showed some stuff, I think, in the spring game, and he looked much better then, in the scrimmage, he was not good.
No, he threw a couple of interceptions, I think, in the scrimmage.
The last one being just a bad interception where it was... It wasn't even the area of the wide receiver.
I don't remember who was standing in front of us, but whoever was standing in front of us was like, no, don't throw. Oh, and then it ends in, the interception right in front of us. And I can't remember who it was. It was a veteran offensive player, but they were like, don't throw it, Jackson, don't throw it.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it still is that even in a controlled scrimmage, the game is still too fast for Jackson. Yeah. And, like I said, he looked better in the spring game, but if you looked at him at the scrimmage, and we did, I was like, no way this guy can see the field. If he sees the field, we're in trouble. Yeah. I'm sure they would prep him enough to get him on the field and make sure that he's comfortable, but he still needs some work. Obviously, I'm judging him solely off of what I've seen from him last year in the spring game and then what I've seen from the scrimmage and spring game this season. So I haven't seen too much growth, but I think, again, it's a young guy who's raw and just needs to continue to work on his, progressions, work on his footwork. There are probably some things like him scrambling that are probably a good thing, but, I don't want to be, I don't want to give him false hope here.
No,
Honestly, I think looking over this whole both scrimmage and spring game, like I said before, the defense won. Martavius French was telling all the family and alumni that were out there they should be on the other side of the field because that's where the winners were.
At the scrimmage, yeah.
Overall, I think, like I said, the defense is going to be great, but I think the offense, with all these weapons, will find a way to get things moving and going. I don't want to give any sort of, be so negative that everybody thinks that, I'm saying, the offense will be trash, right? No. I'm not. It's just going to take a little bit more effort, and I think it's going to take some time because, again, our quarterback now is not Frank Harris and doesn't have very much experience playing.
Right, and I think, if we would have seen phenomenal play from our, offense, I think that would have been like, wow, we're going to be elite. Just given the amount of rotation. So, once Traylor really kind of gets settled and makes his decisions on who he sees as those 1s and 2s and they kind of start to play with each other consistently, I think, things will start to gel.
All right, well, we've talked about roster changes, we've talked about staff changes, we've talked about all sorts of things regarding the program. What we haven't talked about is the schedule.
Right.
And so let's get into our favorite part of our spring recap with our way too early predictions for next year's schedule in terms of a win or loss.
Okay.
Let's start off with Kennesaw State here in the Alamo Dome.
Yeah, and I want to preface this with saying Kennesaw State is an FBS opponent this year. Right. This is their first year of transition, so I don't want anyone looking at the schedule and panicking that Traylor somehow, scheduled 2 FCS programs. That would have been a whole different talking point.
Yeah.
This, I think, is that lower level competition that Traylor's been looking for, though. He always wanted to start his season off with, an FCS opponent or an easier FBS opponent rather than the way that he started it the last 2 years with Houston. I see this as a win, and I think it'll be a good way for our team to kind of get their feet under them.
We're going to end the season at Army with an option team. We're going to start the year with an option team, but Kennesaw State runs a pistol option. It's a weird setup. It can be funky. I think there's going to be a few challenges. The offense trying to get going, the defense trying to figure out how to stop this pistol option. I'm not saying that Kennesaw State's this like terrific team. I think it's going to be feel a little closer. Maybe there's going to be some frustrations with Eddie or Owen or both.
Maybe like the Texas Southern game a couple of years ago.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But it's going to be a win. Next game, we're going to San Marcos. We're playing Texas State.
Ooh, all right. I picked this as a win because I cannot speak the words of predicting a loss. But this one is going to be the toughest Texas State game that we have played, I think. Because, we had all of these kind of question marks with their quarterback. They now have the transfer in from James Madison. I think this is going to be a tough Texas State team, but I am going to hope that we squeak it out. Maybe not in as many overtimes as we did in that 2020 game, but I think this is going to be a 50-50 game that we're going to pull off.
Well, let me enlighten you, because I think this is going to be, again, I would call it a 50-50 game, because it could go either way, but I think this is the first time we lose to Texas State.
I mean, if it's going to be a rivalry, they got to win one of them, right?
Yeah, and I feel like that they've got probably the more talented quarterback, a quarterback that can give UTSA's defense.
They have an experienced quarterback, sure.
Yes, but he's definitely somebody that can give UTSA's defense issues. So I think it's going to be a raucous environment, but I think it's going to be a loss. First loss to Texas State. Then takes us to the week 3 where we are in Austin against Texas. We get to see Trey Moore again, but I think it's an easy loss here. I just don't see that there's going to be, I think you're just trying to get out of it without getting injured.
Exactly. I mean, the momentum that Sark has, obviously this team is at a different level than they've been, or than they were when we played them 2 years ago. And again, we've got a team that's still going to be getting its, feet under itself. So yeah, I think this is definitely going to be a loss.
Which takes us then back home to the Dome to close out the non-district season. Just kidding. It's the non-conference season. Houston Christian. We got the FCS game that Coach Traylor is always seeking. To me, easy win. There's really nothing to talk about here. I think Houston Christian just isn't in a point right now where they're really able to compete. In FCS, they lost a lot of coaches. They lost a lot of players. It's just tough to continue rebuilding, especially at the FCS level.
Yeah, and hopefully we aren't nursing a bunch of injuries from the Texas game, but even if we are, I think we can put out our 2s and 3s and still walk away with a win.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, that brings us to our first bye. That's right, the first bye of the year. There's actually going to be 2 this season. So play 4 games, get our bye, then we travel to East Carolina.
Yeah, and hopefully a game that we're going to be at.
Yeah.
East Carolina was a mess last year. I think they're going to be a mess again this year. I think this is going to be a win for us.
I think it's going to be a little closer than we think. That defense was pretty good. It took a veteran quarterback in Frank Harris to, kind of take them apart. But it's, I think it's going to be a win as well. And I think it's a confidence-boosting win that starts propelling them here, especially with the first conference win of the season.
Right.
That takes us to Houston to see Rice.
Yeah, and this is going to be a very different Rice because they have E.J. Warner. And I know we said the same thing last year, with the quarterback situation. But, E.J. Warner showed he is a very talented kid when we played him at Temple. And I think that he's going to have an offensive line that's at least going to keep him upright, maybe not walking away with a concussion this time. So I feel like we're going to win, but I think this is going to be a closer game than our fans are expecting because this may be one of the more competitive Rice teams or one of the most competitive Rice teams that we've seen in probably 10 years.
UTSA's defense beat up E.J. Warner last year. In Philadelphia, they're going to beat his ass in Houston. I don't think it's going to be as close. I think we still have Rice's number.
But does EJ walk away with a concussion this year or not?
Oh God, I'm not even going to put that into existence for him. But
I hope not. I hope they can just keep him standing.
It's the second conference win for UTSA, which brings us back home to the Dome for FAU.
Yeah, and FAU again is replacing its quarterback once again. I think they're rebuilding one more time, and I think we'll win this game.
Dad bod quarterback isn't there anymore.
I know, that's what I'm saying. Dad bod's
So
not there.
I was kind of hoping that you could come down and see.
Dad bod's not there. Casey Thompson's not coming back. Yeah.
Would have loved it. I mean, who knows what happens between now and then, but from what we know of FAU, yeah, the quarterback position is certainly in flux. I think it's a win as well. Which then takes us to Tulsa, who we haven't seen in a while, but we're going to Tulsa to check out Kevin Wilson's team.
Yeah, so Tulsa last year, again, they were a bit of a mess. They ended up kind of rotating through 2 or 3 quarterbacks. I'm not sure who their starter is going to be. Likely it'll be someone who has some experience from last season, but I'm not confident that Tulsa is going to be head and shoulders above UTSA. So I think this is going to be a win.
I think it's going to be a close one. Tulsa it just feels like a trap game because while they're still not as talented as UTSA, you're kind of looking ahead to the next game, which I'll say in a second. But I think they start looking ahead a little bit too much, and I think it just makes it a little bit closer than you want it to go. I still think it's a win, but Tulsa under Kevin Wilson just seemed to find a way to like hang in there against some of the better teams at times. So that brings us home, and the look-ahead game that I was talking about was Memphis.
Yeah, I think Memphis is going to be looking for revenge. This is the first time that we'll have played them as conference opponents, but the last time we dug ourselves out of a 21, or being behind 21 points, and won. They've got a senior quarterback in Seth Hennigan, who, Traylor looked at as someone he wanted to recruit and didn't. He passed on him, and I think that, their veteran quarterback is going to lead them to a victory, unfortunately.
Seth Hennigan, I'm sure, would have done fine at UTSA, but he would have been riding the bench, and he would have gotten his first opportunity now. There's a good chance that he probably would have left.
Transferred, yeah.
And found some NIL money somewhere or some other opportunity, probably going to Memphis. It would have been odd. But, yeah, I mean, I think the experience of Seth Hennigan is going to help them prevail in the Alamo Dome. I still think it's a really close game. I call it a 50-50, but, I think it's just a tough loss going into the second bye week of the season.
Which is, I hate to say this because it's the second bye week, but I think this is the first time we've had a second bye week.
Yeah,
so,
on purpose.
Yeah, kind of interesting. Exactly, on purpose. Yeah, we don't have COVID in here. So it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be a really nicely timed bye week because we'll have just gotten out of that Memphis game. I think that's going to be a really tough game, so it'll be nice to have that, kind of buffer before we then go into North Texas at home on a Friday.
Look, Eric Morris has done a job at North Texas. Well, they're talking.
Yes, he has done a job.
They've been talking about all these recruits they're getting. Well, yeah, you lost like most of your team, and your team has been terrible.
And you lost your quarterback again. Yes. Chandler Rogers hit the transfer portal.
I mean, you're an offensive guy, and you're losing your quarterback. It just doesn't look great. So anyway, to me, this is a win. I just can't see it any different to this point.
Yeah, no, I think it's a win. And again, most of the time when we play North Texas, regardless of who it is, the team that's at home wins. Obviously we had an exception last year, but I feel like we'll do well.
That brings us to Temple here at home on a Friday night once again.
Yeah,
in the Dome.
2 Friday nights in a row. That's going to be interesting. Temple is rebuilding once again because they lost EJ Warner, so I feel like that's going to be a win and likely an easy win for us.
Yeah, I don't see that they're going to put up too much of a fight. I think, having to find new quarterbacks and insert them in is always difficult. I mean, I think we're going to find out this year just how that goes as well. I think it's a win. That's just, I don't know how easy it'll be, but I think it's just, I think it'll be comfortable enough. Mm-hmm. Which brings us to our season finale against Army in West Point, where we're undefeated. We're undefeated. Yeah. We're 1-0 there.
1-0, yeah.
It's going to be Thanksgiving weekend, so.
Yeah.
Start us out on that one.
And cold. Army is always a challenge for us. Traylor used to have this dialogue about, well, it's a very different offense and you only see it once and blah, blah, blah. obviously that he's going to have to change that narrative because now they're in conference with us. And yeah, you might only see that offense once, but it's a game that is going to count towards whether you make it a championship. We have not played well Thanksgiving weekend. We have not played well in the elements. We have not played well against Army. Overall, I think this is going to be a loss, unfortunately, as much as I would love to share a victory over my coworkers who are Army supporters. I'm not sure it's going to happen this year.
I agree. I think it's going to be a loss, and I think it's a loss that knocks UTSA out of the conference championship game. We were talking away from the pod as to who were going to be those top teams. I thought it was going to be Memphis.
Yeah.
I think South Florida is going to be up there. And obviously, I think UTSA is going to be up there as well. Like, I'm not discounting UTSA whatsoever, but I think just the way this final end of the season, and especially because it's Army, and we just don't play well against Army. That's going to be the second conference loss to me that knocks us out.
Yeah, and we're assuming again that 2 losses, you're not going to be able to get into the conference
absolutely.
Because that's kind of how it's been traditionally. But after Memphis and their veteran quarterback, consistent coach, there's so much change this year. Tulane obviously has a new coach. They lost their quarterback. SMU's not here. The number 2 spot, I think, behind Memphis is wide open. It could be that UTSA is still competitive with 2 losses, but right now we're just making that assumption that 2 losses is not going to get you into the conference championship, and because of that, both of us believe that we won't be in the conference title game. But you just never know because we don't really know how everything's going to play out with the conference yet.
Which is why it's way too early. But I also think that it's going to be an 8.5 over-under in terms of wins for UTSA going into next year. So, not to fret here at all. I think there's still, I think, a path to get to the conference title game. And, as we get more information, as we get through fall and we start seeing some of the way they play.
And we figure out who our quarterback is. I mean, it's also too, I think it would be a little too homerish of us to say, we're going to be in the conference title and we don't even know who our quarterback's going to be.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's just 2 talented quarterbacks at South Florida and at Memphis. I know Memphis has been sort of always in disarray. I think South Florida is really up and coming. If they're able to put it together, I think those are going to be the teams that are going to challenge UTSA for that conference title spot. So we don't have them going to the conference title. We do have them obviously going to a bowl game where I have them to win. I don't care who the opponent is because I think that UTSA will have some things figured out. And after last season, Owen's going to want to stay undefeated, and he does.
Yeah, I think for sure we'll go to a bowl game. I have us winning. So I have us at 10-3 with that bowl win, which I do realize also sounds very homerish in my way too early predictions because we don't know who that quarterback is going to be. But I'm assuming it's Owen.
I'm going to go. Mine's obviously 9-4. I'll say this. I do think that this team is obviously going to play well. They're gonna do some really good things. The question is, are we going to have the consistency? And at this point in time, I just don't know that it's there, that we know enough yet to get there. So it'll be fun once we get to the fall camp, and let's see how some of this changes up.
Right. All right, before we go, let's talk about some news in some of these other UTSA programs. Let's start off with soccer.
Yeah, news here is, honestly, they had some scrimmages. It looks like they are starting to get things together, trying to figure out that roster, see, how, I guess, really what gaps they have. But one of the biggest news is Sophie Morin, one of our midfielders, is currently overseas playing with her Irish under-19 team, and they qualified for the Women's Euro Final Tournament this summer. It's July 14th through the 27th in Lithuania. Second time that Ireland has made this tournament, first time since... And the first time they did it was 2014, so about 10 years ago. So here we have Sophie's going to be playing with this Irish team. It's going to be there's been some big names, women's soccer-wise, I guess you can say, that have played at this tournament for their country. So really good to see Sophie getting that international experience. And certainly, I think it'll be a little difficult, I think, during the season if she's called up again. But
Right.
for the most part, I just wish her good luck. It's going to be a tough tournament. There's, a lot of stalwarts in there, like England, Spain, Netherlands, France. It's loaded. So good luck to her and Ireland come July. Now, one of the things to always realize when it comes to international players and someone like Sophie Morin is that they don't get any NIL offers. They can't accept them because of the international student rules. But today, there were some changes in the NIL.
Yeah, there's some big news that came out of the NCAA today. One of those is that beginning August 1st, they are going to allow the schools to identify NIL opportunities and to facilitate those deals between student athletes and the third parties. Now, the student athlete is still going to have to take control of the deal that they make, but it will allow the school to connect those student athletes to not just collectives, but businesses that may be looking to sign NIL deals. There was a caveat. They said it was only for student athletes who disclose their NIL arrangements, so I'm not sure really exactly what that's going to look like, but anticipate that you're going to hear a lot more about NIL over the next couple of weeks and months as we get to this August 1st date.
We never hear about NIL, though.
I know. Even more. We're going to talk even more about NIL, and the schools are going to be more involved, which, I think it's going to potentially play an even bigger part in the recruiting process, which may or may not be good, right?
Right.
Depending on what side you look at. The other thing that came out was the NCAA did agree to drop the one-time transfer rule. So now student athletes can transfer, and as long as they're academically eligible, they are able to play right away. So there's no one-time transfer rule. Now you're really able to transfer as many times as you want as long as you're academically eligible, you're making progress as an undergrad towards your degree, or as a grad student, you've graduated.
And I think as much as people are going to be upset about transfers, that's the key in there, is that they have to be academically eligible.
Right.
And meet these requirements. It's
just
already
like
happened.
A non-student athlete would be to transfer.
Right. But it's already happened with, I think it's Michigan, with John L. Davis, who's transferring from FAU. He did not qualify. So now they're trying to figure out how to get him to qualify, but that's where I think that's where the kind of underhandedness is going to come.
Right.
But I think this is a good rule. And like you said, I mean, it's a regular college student. I could transfer wherever I wanted to.
Yeah.
I might become a sophomore all of a sudden because maybe some credits don't transfer, but I think this is something good for the college athletes.
Yeah. To me, one of the biggest things that came out of this announcement today was the Women's Basketball Performance Fund. I'm not sure that people really understand maybe what that is, but if you look at the men's tournament, they are given money for every game that they play in the NCAA tournament in basketball. So they're given a unit per game for each conference team. So for an American conference, if you have multiple bids on the men's side and those teams play multiple games, you get more money. The way that's structured is there's a value assigned to that unit, and that pays out annually over 6 years. So on the men's side, this year, a unit was worth $342,500 annually, or about $2.1 million over that 6-year payout. Huge dollars. Now the women's side, not necessarily going to be that lucrative, but with this negotiation they did recently with ESPN for their television contract, now the NCAA believes that they're going to be able to fund a performance fund similar to the men. It sounds like they are planning to pay it out somewhat similarly. However, they're asking right now for questions and comments and feedback on some of those key questions. Their goal, from what they said in the press release, was that they wanted next year's tournament to be the first year where they have this payout of the performance fund. And so they would earn the units next year, and then in 2025, 2026, they would start paying those out. For upcoming teams like UTSA basketball that are looking to get into the NCAA tournament, this is something that's going to make that tournament even more special and lucrative for the conference.
Absolutely. Well, speaking of which, let's talk some UTSA women's basketball. 2 signings that have occurred. First of all, got Nina De Leon Negron from just down the road at UIW. She kind of lit us up a couple years ago when we played her. Put up 25 points on us and led UIW over UTSA. We kind of needed a veteran guard. In some of our discussions with Coach Aston, she kind of mentioned the fact that they were needed to have that veteran. And then, it wasn't just losing Madison Cockrell, it was also really losing
Kira White.
Yeah, and because of it, you need, I think, that... I feel like that ball handler that can help Sydney, A, on the court, B, let Sydney kind of play off the ball a little bit more. And Coach Aston had talked about that throughout the season, that she wanted to get Sydney sort of off the ball instead of really focusing her at point guard. So getting a true point guard like this is really going to help, I think, our UTSA women's basketball team, as is the signing of Emilia Dannenbauer, 6'4", forward center from Germany. She's going to bring some size to the lineup. I haven't been able to find any video from her, but it looks like she's been a pretty good contributor to the teams that she's played on. And again, much like the international players, there's a lot of you're not really playing for your high school. It's more like a club team that you're playing with. And, she's been able to, I think, carve a nice niche. And, bringing a player of her stature is going to be good to help with the defensive end. First of all, like I said, bring some size. But also, I mean, if she can be, and, again, just depending on what she's like, she can add a lot more forward help. So 2 exciting additions. I think, Coach Aston and the rest of the assistant coaches are out on the trail now, trying to find some future players. So as soon as we hear more, we'll let you guys know. But before we go on, I do have to say, sad to say that Empress Davenport accepted a position with Ole Miss. Sad because you don't really want to see her leave, but on the other hand, you are so happy for her because it is a step up, and I think she's earned it. She's obviously a talented coach, so good luck to her.
Well, we need to talk about men's basketball. Last time we talked, Coach Claunch had been announced, but we hadn't had his press conference.
Right.
So now we can kind of talk a little bit about what we learned from that press conference. I think the big thing was he named his assistant coaches. Now, whether or not they're finally through the hiring process, because he seemed a little...
he seemed
unsure.
unsure.
A little unsure on that. 2 of them we've seen change their social media to say that they're UTSA coaches, so I'm sure they're probably both through the background check. The other 2, not yet. But nonetheless, Trevor DeLoach was named as an assistant and recruiting coordinator. He had been with Austin Claunch at Nichols in the past. Joey Brooks, who we surmised was one of the coaches because he'd been tagged in some posts from Coastal Carolina, also worked with Austin Claunch at Nichols. Nick Bowman, he again worked with Claunch at Nichols. He's been at Clemson. He was most recently at the University of New Orleans. And then a name that is close, near and dear to my heart, Joseph Jones from Tarleton. As you guys know, I am also a Tarleton alum, so we watch Tarleton basketball, and this year they had a phenomenal run. Billy Gillespie is the head coach at Tarleton, but he had to step away for health issues, and Joseph Jones led really the majority of the season as the acting head coach. And what he did was so impressive that he was named the WAC Coach of the Year, which is really great, for an assistant who's stepping in to be given that honor. And it's pretty impressive, first of all, that then UTSA is in a position to be able to take someone like that as an assistant. Tarleton finished their season 25-10, 16-4 in conference. They made it to the WAC semifinals. They were in their last year of transition, so they weren't able to go to the NCAA tournament, even if they had won the WAC tournament. They played in the CIT. They also made that semifinals there. You know, one of the things that we'll get to later on that kind of Austin Clonch talked about was, you know, really the record at home, wanted to be undefeated at home. You know, Tarleton wasn't undefeated at home, but they came pretty darn close. And, you know, again, to have that, you know, leadership on the team as an assistant, I think is going to be really impressive. Joseph Jones is a name that I would expect that we're going to hear a lot about in the future for, you know, other head coaching opportunities. So probably won't be someone who's with us for very long, but hey, Austin Clonch is also an up and coming name, and it may be that he gets, you know, snapped up by a bigger program. So maybe we'll be looking at Joseph Jones as our head coach in a couple of years. Who knows?
I mean, we had to have been looking at him anyway, just potentially as a possible, just to maybe interview him. So yeah, to swipe him up at the same time is still.
Now, I haven't seen him officially change any of his social media over to UTSA, so I'm still a bit nervous to say that he's 100% coming, but hey, it was announced in the press conference, so that's what we know at this point.
It's got to be truth.
Yeah. Some of the other things that Austin Clonch talked about that I think resonated with people who've been following the men's basketball program at UTSA was he talked very clearly about his culture pillars, his code, very much likening him to Jeff Traylor. You know, we heard Jeff Traylor talk about his culture from the very beginning. Now, he didn't call it the triangle of toughness right away, but he talked about his culture pillars. So to hear Austin talking about those culture pillars in his press conference, I think is a good sign. It lays that foundation that he is going to be kind of cut from the same cloth as Jeff Traylor, Karen Aston, some of these other coaches, as we anticipated. He said that his culture pillars were embrace the moment, be great teammates, and earn the right to win. So pretty easy, pretty straightforward, but I anticipate we're going to hear more about those as, you know, he kind of gets really settled into the UTSA job.
Yeah, and then some of his goals, you know, he talked about winning the regular season and then winning the conference tournament, win an NCAA tournament conference game, and then be undefeated at home. To me, I think the most important thing is always to win the conference tournament. It's the auto bid into the NCAA tournament. And I think, to me, the number one seed during the regular season, whoever wins the regular season, it's rare that they win the conference tournament at times. Like, I just... For the most part, they usually struggle to get there because they put so much effort during the regular season. So, to me, I think it's going to be important that he wins the conference tournament. Now, remember what we talked about with him. One of the red flags was that he wasn't able to win the conference tournament.
Yeah,
so, I think that's going to be sort of what we want to watch. And again, a flag to look at is how does he perform within the conference tournament, and how does he, as he builds his teams, is he able to proceed to the championship games, or are we talking it's just one and dones? You know, we've seen that before, and it cost a job before. I'm not saying that Austin's going to do that, but it is something to keep in the back of your mind. That
over the next couple of years.
Yeah, got to be good there.
But he said we're going to be cutting down nets in the combo.
Okay. Hey.
Maybe not next year. Look, because at the end of the day, he's got to get a roster together, and you know, to no surprise, we've had lots of guys hit the transfer portal. Coach Clonch is going to have to really rebuild a lot of the key positions at this roster. We're in signing day period right now. Ran from starting April 17th. It runs to May 15th. So you're going to hear a lot more over the next couple of days and weeks about, you know, who he's signing. But let's talk about who we think, as of this moment, is going to be on the team from the previous team. You know, obviously there's a lot of fluidity right now with the transfer portal being open, but the returners that we believe are going to be on the team right now are Blessing Adesepe. You know, we talked to him briefly at the spring game.
You did.
Yes, I did. You know, he came by, he said hello. I made a point of asking him, hey, are you going to be on the team next season?
Exclusive.
And he said yes. And he said he's a loyal guy. So, look, I'm not going to necessarily hold it to him. Something might change between, you know, the spring game and the end of the transfer portal window, but from what we know, Blessing will be on the team. Nizar Mahmood, again, has come out publicly and said he wants to be on the team, so we don't anticipate that to change. And then one of the guys that's in the transfer portal, Trey Edmonds, has also been at, different events and sounds like he is considering UTSA as, one of the schools that he's looking at, but certainly hasn't made a commitment yet.
So let's talk a few new signees. We got Terrian Joseph, 6'3" shooting guard, played at Southern. Guy was just filling the bucket. I mean, he averaged 20.5 points per game, shot 30% from three-point range, 43.8 overall. A little low on the free throws, I think, 67%. But, I think at this point, if you're trying to find some guys that can score, make some buckets. I think Austin Klonch is going to find a way to get the most out of some of these players. Also got Paul Lewis, 6'2" guard from Vanderbilt. Was pretty much riding the bench, so didn't hear a lot from him. It's mostly like about 4.4 points per game, 33% shooting. Doesn't seem like he's a three-point shooter, so it's going to be interesting if he's maybe more of a defensive stopper. But I think what you really want to cover is the fact that there's a couple players from Tarleton that if Joseph Jones is truly an assistant at UTSA could possibly give us a look.
Yeah, I think two guys to kind of keep an eye on are sophomore Devin Barnes. He was a 6-foot guard. He has publicly said that he has visited UTEP. He's gotten some interest from East Carolina. So certainly you have another school in the American Conference that's looking at him. Seems like he could be an American caliber player. The other one is freshman forward Emmanuel Innocente. He's from Italy. He's 6'5". He was on the WAC all-defensive and all-freshman team. So someone, again, that was very impressive in his limited time that he played for Tarleton, but he's got several years of eligibility left, got a connection with Joseph Jones. So, again, those are two guys to kind of keep your eye on.
Absolutely. And, I think if you get sort of the Edward Innocente type player, be good to have in terms of sort of a defensive stopper. Mm-hmm. Something that UTSA just hasn't had in a long time. Now, again, we're not saying that they're coming, but Joseph Jones comes, there's most likely going to be at least a Tarleton player that shows up on this roster. Right. I would just have to imagine that he would be able to pluck one of those guys.
Sure. All right, well, I think that about wraps it up for us here at the Hail Married Podcast. I'm Atos.
And I'm Toves.
We'll be back some point this summer with more basketball or football coverage as things kind of pop up.
Birds up.